Welcome to the World Language Webinar Series, the spring part of the series about milestones on our state standards. Today we're going to be talking about advocacy tools with our state standards. Our agenda is pretty simple and straightforward. We'll begin with our welcome, and then we'll move right into our standards milestones for today's broadcast. Specifically, we'll talk about the timeline that those have developed on, the benefits and celebrations of the milestones or advocacy tools that come from our state standards, and then what's next for North Carolina with that particular tool or idea. After that, we'll have some reminders and announcements for all world language educators, and then we'll have our wrap up and answer any final questions. Before we officially begin today, I want to make sure everyone has taken a look at their Webex event control panel. It should look something similar to what you see on the left side of the screen, with the slides displayed and then your control panel to the right. It may look a little bit different depending on which computer or device you're on, or which web browser you've chosen today to join us on. But in general, that's what it looks like. Do keep in mind that Webex is accessible online and via app, so you can join either way that's best for you. All participants are on mute for the recording, and that control panel is always displayed on the side, so you'll see who the host or speaker is with initials. We'll do some polling questions periodically there, and then you always have access to the chat feature as well. Now would be a good time to go ahead and take a look at the chat, make sure you have access to that. We do have some activities we're going to use the chat for, and of course you're welcome to add in any questions or comments or things like that throughout the broadcast in the chat. There are buttons on the bottom of your screen. I've done sort of a close-up of them here. They make it look a little bit different, but these are to help you throughout. Specifically, the one in the middle is with the Q&A or chat is always there, so you can click on that and get your chat box. The one at the end that's red with the X is what you click when we're done to exit. If you accidentally click it at any time or have to leave during the webinar, please use your link that you used originally to get back in to join our broadcast. And then, of course, the button with 3 little dots means that you can click on that and find even more features if you'd like. All right, well, let's use the polling feature and get started today by finding out why you decided to join the broadcast today. I always like to know what people's motivations are, what their goals are. So please check all that apply using the poll feature on your control panel. Did you join today because you want to access professional development made for world languages? Did you want to earn 1 contact hour for license renewal? Are you gathering information to share with your department, team, school, or district? Do you want to learn about the state standards and our achievements and advocacy with them? Or do you need to ask a question about world languages, our state standards, policy, or anything else? I'll go ahead and launch that poll question, and you can respond. Should be able to click the answers you want. All right, that's it for the poll. Thank you for responding. I'm going to go ahead and share the results with you. You should see them coming up in your control panel now. It looks like most of you are here today to earn 1 contact hour for licensure renewal, and that's great. Happy to have you here. Please look for your certificate of participation to come to you via email as an attachment about a week or so after this broadcast. Looks like many of you are also here to access professional development made just for world languages. And of course, that's the goal of our World Language Webinar series that happens throughout the school year. So I'm glad you're here for that. A number of you also want to gather information to share with your department, your team, your school, or your district. And I will tell you that we will post the materials from this broadcast, all of the archives, including this recording, the slides in 3 different formats, and any handouts or links. So you'll have access to all of that, and you can repurpose it as you need to for your local presentations or study. There's also some folks who want to learn about the state standards and our achievements in advocacy with them, and that's great too. That is our main focus for today. So let's go ahead and get started and talk about our standards milestone for today's broadcast. This is the second broadcast in the spring series, so you may have been with us in March as well when we talked about some milestones with that. But we're going to explore some of our milestones today that are a little more focused on advocacy, or at least components of our state standards and its toolkit that have been used for advocacy, regardless of how they were originally designed. So let's begin with a quick activity to kind of let you know what we're going to be talking about and make sure everyone's focused on that. This is a flood the chat activity. So this is a situation where you're going to answer a question. In this case, it's the question, in what order did these standards advocacy tools get shared? What I want you to do is put the letters in order, A, B, C, and D, for when these tools became available by typing them into the chat box, but do not click send until I say go with my Bitmoji. Bitmoji is just a little avatar I have that looks like me, but allows me to keep my webcam off and not put any pressure on our Wi-Fi. So this is a flood the chat. So what I want you to think about is, in what order did these tools get shared? The first one is the Global Languages Endorsement, or GLE, our state seal of biliteracy. The second one is the K-12 bridging documents for classical, dual and heritage, and modern language programs. The third one is the administrator guides for world languages. And the fourth one is the standards mapping documents for global education and SEL, or social and emotional learning. So again, type in the chat box to everyone or to all presenters, depending on your options, the order of the letters that these tools became available in. So just type them A, B, C, and D, whatever order you believe to be the answer, but don't hit send until I say go. All right, here's my Bitmoji. Please go ahead and hit send in the chat so we can see the order you decided on. All right, looks like we've got several answers here. On the next slide are the answers in order. It's C, A, D, and B. And we're going to talk about that a little bit as we go across our slides today and really think about, again, what these tools have done for us, why they were milestones for us, and how they've become advocacy tools, whether they were intended to be or not originally. So I'm going to start our timeline today in 2014. Of course, most of you know we officially started implementing our current standards in the fall of 2012 after they were approved in 2010 by our State Board of Education, and then we had built some of these instructional tools as well as others that would come for the future. So in 2014, when we had been implementing our standards for a couple of years, we had the publication of the Administrator Guides for World Languages, and there are 3 of those that we'll talk about. In 2015, the following year, we established our Global Languages Endorsement, or GLE, our state seal of biliteracy. In 2017, actually, and in 2019, we posted different standards mapping documents. The first one in 2017 for global education, and the second one in 2019 for SEL. And then just last year, in 2020, We publish the K-12 bridging documents, and those are available for classical, dual and heritage, and modern language programs. So that's our timeline that we're going to focus on today. So we always start with the benefits and celebrations that we have to go with this particular tool. And so I'll start with our administrator guides for world languages. You see a snapshot of one of the three there on the right-hand side, and that's actually linked, hyperlinked to the page that has all three of the documents to download. The benefits and celebrations for our administrator guides included helping administrators understand world language programs, standards, proficiency outcomes, and so on. And obviously, that's what these administrator guides were designed for. When we think about our administrators, we usually think about our principals, because oftentimes your principal is the administrator who observes you, does your teacher evaluation each year, and so forth. And it's often the person as well that people go to with questions about, what do our world language programs look like, or what should they look like? And they're a help to our principals to really understand how our standards are structured, what our goals are with them, like with our proficiency outcomes, and what does proficiency mean, and how are we using like the national scale that we have in our state standards for proficiency. And also to understand our programs in general, because each type of program we have in our state standards, that's K-12, so classical languages like Latin and ancient Greek, dual and heritage languages like dual language immersion, as well as heritage language or native speaker courses, and then modern language programs, which are traditional languages taught as a separate subject. They vary quite a bit. And many times, the way we implement those programs today is different than what our administrators experienced as students themselves. And so the administrator guides for world languages are designed to be a help to our administrators to understand that. They also were an update from a tool we had with our previous set of standards called the Principals Briefs. Those were set up by grade span, so we had an elementary brief, a middle school brief, and a high school brief. But in working with teams of teachers from across the state as we implemented our standards and developed our instructional toolkit components like the administrator guides, they determined that it would be better to focus on the briefs looking at K-12, but looking at the different programs rather than grade spans. Also, the administrator guides for world languages support professional development. They are linked directly to best practices in world languages and to our North Carolina Educator Evaluation Standards, or NESA standards, 1 through 5, that's part of our annual evaluation as teachers. And so we sort of cross-reference the TEL, the Teacher Effectiveness for Language Learning Project, with our NESA standards so that we could help administrators complete evaluations and give us feedback that would be worthwhile and helpful, but also would be linked to the best practices in world languages so that that would help administrators see what they should be looking for in our classrooms, and also to help guide us, because the TEL project has a lot of tools we can use for further professional development. And that's another kind of thing too, educating others, that our administrator guides have been used for, because, in addition to whoever our administrator is, that's our supervisor, like a principal, there are other people in a school building that need to know more about world language programs than they might. So for example, school counselors, particularly school counselors who are scheduling students for classes and thinking about how does the student progress from level 1, 2, 3, or 4, or what does it mean if you have like a DLI program or a classical language program, and how is that different than what they might be familiar with. We've also used the administrator guides to educate our teaching colleagues, maybe teachers in other subjects, again, who might have had a different experience learning world languages than what we're focused on today, as well as parents or guardians of students, because they need to know too what our goals are, what our outcomes are, how things are structured in the classroom for what their child is learning. So I'm going to click on the link here that goes right to our administrator guides page, as you can see, and I'm going to put in the chat box so you can go to that, a direct link to that page. Give me just a moment while I do that. This is a page on our World Languages Google site that has all of our guides posted. There you go. It's in there now. I'll make this just a little bit bigger so we can easily. But the administrator guides page just has a brief explanation of what the administrator guides are and how they're created. And then you can download any one of the three. And like I said, they cover our K-12 programs, and so you can click on the one that you prefer. I'll click on Modern Languages just to show you what's in there. They are similar, but they have some differences as well. So as you can see coming up on the screen, the administrator start with an explanation of the program and then talk about the structure of our World Language Essential Standards and what we mean with our actual proficiency scale. After that, they have information about research and testing results and sort of the benefits of studying a language. Some of them also have information about characteristics of programs, particularly with dual language immersion and our heritage language courses. Then on the second page, there's information about what someone would see if they walked into, in this case, a modern language classroom, but of course, dual and heritage classroom or a classical language classroom, and what the appropriate expectations are, including on that second page, charts from our state standards that show the proficiency outcomes that we're looking for. In all three of the administrator guides for world languages, you have these last two pages that are the same. This is meant to be that administrative tool that people can use to look at our NISA standards for evaluation, but then cross-reference with the TEL project. And so you see the things that are underlined there come directly out of our state document for evaluation, but then also have a lot of information about world language best practices and what should be present in a classroom, what should be happening in a classroom if things are on track with best practices. I'll just kind of scroll down. You're welcome to download some of these as well, whichever ones you're interested in. They're just in the Google Drive so that we can access them easily. I mentioned, by the way, that this is cross-referenced with the TEL project, the Teacher Effectiveness for Language Learning. So if you want more information about that and how those domains work and how we sort of cross-reference, you can always get to the TEL project itself and get that information. All right, so those are administrator guides for world languages. And those are sort of benefits and celebrations. But we also focus on what's next for North Carolina with our administrator guides for world languages. There's been a lot of things happen with those. They have been touted as one of the most often used components of our instructional toolkit for our state standards. They also have served as guides for others. So we continue to share with other content or subject areas to serve as a model, because there are other areas that looked at our administrator guide and says, well, I want an administrator guide, for example, for arts education, or I want one for ESL or school counseling. And so we have shared our materials with them and the process we went through to create them, because again, there was a team of teachers that worked on this. We had several drafts we went through before things finally got approved and we started using them. These are called sometimes look for documents because it's literally what an administrator should look for when they go into a teacher's classroom. We also want to continue to think about how to improve the administrator guides for world languages in the future with what we've learned from them. So for example, we've learned that a lot of mentor teachers and new teachers, whether new to the profession in general or just very young teachers who don't have a lot of experience yet, that they've been using them for things like self-assessment and evaluation and feedback, and to help each other when they're working on their mentor-mentee connections. We've also known them to be used in professional learning communities or professional learning teams, PLCs or PLTs. And so those are some of the lessons learned about them. We also need to think about how to incorporate the new TEL project materials. TEL project updated some of the things that they were doing in 2019. So these were published in 2014. So we've gotten a lot of good use out of them, but we need to be sensitive to what the changes were with the actual TEL project nationally that we use to create our best practices. And then also we need to be thinking about when we have new state standards, likely in the 24-25 school year, what do these administrator guides for world languages need to look like? How do we improve them? How do we update them? What do we need to do? And so it's a lot to think about, but now is a good time to start that thinking, because as you can see, we've got a while to do it before we have new standards. And that's what I want to talk to you about next, is our standard revision process and our timeline through 2025. I know we're wrapping up a school year, so sometimes it's a good time to think about planning ahead like this, and sometimes we're just focused on finishing this school year. But our standards revision for world languages is officially started. It's in several phases, and so if you were involved with the last standards revision work, whether in the writing teams or providing feedback or that kind of thing, you may see that this is a little bit different. We have a specific process sort of laid out. It takes a little bit longer, but it also gives us more time to go through each stage or step and make sure we have all of the information we need before moving forward. So we are officially in the review and exploration stage. That is true for us in World Languages for the 2020-2021 school year that we're finishing up right now, as well as the 21-22 school year that we're anticipating at the moment. We got 2 years because of the pandemic, as you might have guessed, where we were kind of put on a pause as we work through things with the pandemic, because when we go to revise the standards, it's very important that we have a lot of educators involved. So teachers from all levels in different languages, different parts of the state, as well as administrators and others who help us with world language programs and setting them up. And so that wasn't really possible to get that kind of input like we needed during this school year because of the pandemic. So we get 2 years for review and exploration. And so that'll be good. That gives us some extra time to work on things. The following school year in 22-23, if we decide we're going to revise our standards, then the actual revision process will start. And this is where we'll convene writing teams. We'll put together drafts of the new standards based on the feedback and so forth we got from the review and exploration stage, and we'll put those out for public feedback. The following school year, assuming we get those new standards approved, we'll start to work on installations. That's for 23-24. And so installation means what we're doing is building the instructional toolkit components that go with the new standards. So things like the administrator guides for world languages will be updated and revised so that they can help in the implementation of our new standards. So that's what we're doing during the 23-24 school year. And then finally, we'll officially begin the new standard 24-25 school year. That's quite a ways away, but probably shorter than we think, given how time passes. So that implementation won't begin until the fall of 2024, the first semester. And so it will also likely include textbook selection. I've gotten questions recently, in fact, about textbook selection process for world languages. And like I said, that will probably coincide with our implementation year of the new standards. So that's the overview. And so I want to drill down a little bit on what we mean by review and exploration, since that's where we are at currently. So let's take a look at this process. For review and exploration, we have several things we're trying to accomplish. And again, we have 2 school years to do it in. First of all, we collect and review feedback and data through various methods. For example, this webinar is one way we collect and review feedback. I see a question right now from Jason in the chat box about what types of input are you specifically looking for when reviewing, and would you entertain some basic ideas from us now? I would absolutely entertain basic ideas, because that's part of what we're doing in this webinar today. The questions and activities I've designed are to get that feedback from you and that input on what our new standards should involve and what our new instructional toolkit components for the standards should involve. So you are already part of that process by participating in this webinar. We'll also be doing conference presentations. We've done a few of those already. Those of you who are familiar with the Foreign Language Association of North Carolina might have heard the presentations we've given at their fall and spring conferences about the revision process for our standards and getting input, and again, doing some activities and things like that to start getting feedback from people. We'll also do some focus groups, looking at things like, proficiency outcomes, let's say, or maybe specific types of programs, K-12. And we'll do some surveys as well that will be sent out on the listserv and shared with everyone. In addition, another thing we do as part of the review and exploration process is to analyze the current research on the standards being reviewed. And so part of my role, of course, is to look at our research across the country and globally to think about what does language acquisition look like for K-12 learners, and how do we incorporate that information into our state standards. We also review feedback, like I said before, as well as data and research we look at our state policies and statutes that impact world languages. We look at federal legislative requirements, although there aren't very many that impact world languages. And then we look again at those surveys and other stakeholder input that we've gotten from webinars, conference presentations, focus groups, and surveys. And then at the end of that, so think about the spring of 22, so just a year from now or so, we're going to evaluate those findings and share recommendations for standards revision with our State Board of Education. As part of this process, we do have to formally present at the State Board of Education and request their permission to go ahead and revise our standards and update them if that's where the feedback and recommendations are pointing to. It is, of course, likely that will be the case. So that's what we'll be doing over this next school year, which we've already been. On the slide, those things that just turned to orange are the things that we have been focusing on with the review and exploration part of this for this school year. Like I said, the pandemic kind of put us in an interesting situation, but we still have been collecting and reviewing feedback and data. I've been doing that in all of our webinars, particularly starting with winter series in January and continuing on with the spring series. We've done conference presentations where we've talked about the revision process and getting input. And we've already started looking at that current research as well as the other state policies and statutes and research from other states when they do their state standards. So we're already working on parts of this as we go. So let's stop for a moment and think about now, what one thought, question, comment, etc. do you have at this moment about our administrator guides for world languages and or the standards revision process? Because remember, our administrator guides for world languages are an instructional toolkit component. And I also want to know what you're thinking about with the standards revision process. I call this the chat TQC because I want you to put a short note in the chat box, probably about 10 to 15 words, describing whatever it is you have as far as like a thought, a question, or a comment, your TQ or C. Be sure to put a TQ or C at the start so we know which one it is. And again, this is some data, some input from you that I'm collecting already on our standards revision process. So for example, you might have the question, when will the standards writing team be formed? All right, I'll pause here a moment. Let's take about a minute or so. Go ahead and put in your thought, question, or comment about our administrator guides for world languages or the standards revision process. All right. Thank you so much for sharing in the chat box. I'm going to start sharing out. Looks like most of you are sending this to me privately. I apologize if the settings are not so you can share it with everyone, but we can always talk together about this. And of course, like I said, I will gather this information into our standards revision input and feedback that we're gathering as part of this process. So a couple thoughts have been shared. We have a great base to start from. And also, thanks to all who worked hard at preparing our standards, it's well organized and easy to follow. I couldn't agree more. There were a lot of people involved. We had a writing team of about 30 to 35 people involved, and then we got public feedback on our current standards from over 600 individuals, as well as a number of groups and organizations who shared their input and helped us create various drafts until we got to the final one. We do have a couple comments too. It will be interesting to see how this all plays out in the coming years. I wholeheartedly agree. We've got our timeline set up and ready to go. We'll see how it works out as we go through it. We also have a comment from Tony who says, I like that the administrator guides are a resource for the NESIS evaluation tool, especially for observers who are not licensed to teach a world language. Absolutely, and that's one of the reasons they were created, and I think one of the reasons they're so popular with other subject areas, that they want to create their own for their areas, for their administrators who aren't licensed to teach in their subject areas either. Another comment about the administrators guides is it's very convenient and helpful to have the website for the guides so they can get the information they want. And like I said, those are always available for download for you. We also have we have some people who've combined their comments with a question. That's good. They put a C and a Q. This person said, I thought textbooks were not coming back, are going to be online. We'll see. If you want to look at the textbook evaluation process, it is on the API website, and there are other subject areas currently going through textbook adoption. Some of the wording has been changed so that it's not just hardback or hard copy textbooks, paper textbooks, but in fact does include online resources, digital resources, and other types of tools that we might use in our teaching. So the term textbook does go well beyond just an actual physical textbook that you have, that you use. All right, so let's take a look at some of the questions and answer those. The first question I see is, how often do the standards get revised? And the answer is, it depends. It depends on what the process is and so forth. We, as I said, got our last set of standards, our current set of standards approved in 2010, and they first implemented in 2012. So by that measure, it's about 10 years or so. It isn't always that long. Sometimes it's a little bit shorter. You can see from the timeline that goes through 2025, it's at least 4 or 5 years. And it somewhat rests too on what the need is to revise standards and how you can schedule the different subject areas. So for example, I mentioned, right now there's some other areas that are going through things like textbook adoption, and you see that that's with that last stage, that implementation stage that we have at the end. So they clearly started this process several years ago and have worked their way up to that point. And we have other subject areas in all the different stages that you saw on our timeline. So we are in that schedule with our own timeline. And so it happens probably every, I would say, 7 to 10 years now on average, that's the plan going forward. We have a couple of people asking about things like, when will the standards writing team be formed, which is the example question. Based on our timeline, the first time we would be forming a standards writing team would be the fall of 2022. And so if you're interested in that kind of thing or applying, it will be an open application process online, and so you could apply for that. We also have questions about what we'll be doing in this school year, the coming one, 21-22, and we'll still be doing our review and exploration, doing our research, getting feedback and input. That's what we're doing right now. We've got one person who's saying they have a question on research and testing. Are there any statistics on the percentage of high schoolers who take level 4 or 5 of the language, and where can you find this info? It's a great question, and there actually is information specifically for our state using our enrollment data that looks at the number of students who are enrolled in a level 4, level 5, or 6, 7, or 8, depending on that, as well as things like AP and IB courses. That information is on the landing page of our website, and so you can go directly to it and download what you need for the language you teach. There's also an overview document called World Languages in North Carolina that has a sort of a summary of that information. So depending on what details you want, it's there. There's also a research and testing component included in the administrator guides for world languages, which you saw. All right. I think I've got all of our questions. Thank you so much for sharing your comments, your thoughts, and your questions. We will include that as part of our information on the standards revision process. Well, let's go ahead and move forward on our timeline. I'm conscious of our time, I want to make sure we get questions answered and get good feedback to document for our revision process, but I also want us to stay on track with time. So moving on our timeline, after 2014 and the publication of Administrator Guides for World Languages, in 2015, we established for the first time our state seal of biliteracy. We call it the Global Languages Endorsement, or GLE, because it's one of 5 diploma endorsements, and diploma endorsements were already something our graduating seniors could earn. Specifically with the GLE, our state seal of biliteracy, which you see pictured on the right side of the slide there, we have had over 30,000 graduating seniors recognized with the GLE for their bilingualism and biliteracy in 12 or more languages since 2015. That's an incredible accomplishment for our students, for our teachers, for our programs, and just for world language education in general. This means that our students have been recognized for their skills in English as well as a world language. We also have, as a benefit, data about each year's GLE earners available by district and charter school, and that's available on our main GLE or State Seal of Biliteracy webpage, so you can actually go in and look for your district or your charter school and find out how many of your graduating seniors each year have earned the GLE and in what languages the GLE has been earned in your district or charter school. Just starting this year for 2021, we are also going to have GLE numbers for each high school being added to our North Carolina school report cards. I think some of you are very familiar with the school report cards and the fanfare and celebration there is when those are rolled out every year that give details about each of our schools as well as our districts and charter schools. And so the GLE earners, because that's a diploma endorsement, they will be documented with all the other diploma endorsement earners on their high schools school report card. So that's coming out soon. And finally, another benefit or celebration we have with our Seal of Biliteracy is that North Carolina is a national leader in the Seal of Biliteracy initiative. And that's something that I think we should all take pride in, but also take as a challenge to continue to do well in this and to think about how we can make it better. North Carolina was one of the first 10 states to ever have a Seal of Biliteracy, which was incredible. We rank very high in the nation, usually in the top 5 for the number of Seal of Biliteracy earners each school year for each graduating class. And we are looked at too as a very interesting model to follow given the options we give students for completing their world language requirements for their Seal of Biliteracy here. So there's several different paths students can choose, and we try to make those accessible and equitable so that, you know, as many students as possible have a pathway to earn that when it comes to their world language requirement. Now, what's next for North Carolina with our Seal of Biliteracy? Well, we want to continue to educate colleagues, parents, et cetera, about this diploma endorsement at the state and local levels. And this is where we have done some things as a state to really move forward with this, but also we've challenged ourselves to think about how we could share this at the local level. So we often ask questions like, you know, since this is a Seal of Biliteracy and there actually is a diploma endorsement on a student's diploma, how is that celebrated at the local level? Do you include students in like a senior awards night and recognize them? Is there something indicated on the high school graduation program that they've earned this? Or do they all stand up and get recognized for earning this particular diploma endorsement, as well as the other diploma endorsements, of course, at graduation? And we want to continue to educate others about this, because if we want students to earn this and to be recognized for it and respected for what they've done with bilingualism and biliteracy, we have to make others aware. Just like with the administrator guides in helping others understand world language education, we want to make sure that everyone understands what kind of achievement and accomplishment this is to have a Seal of Biliteracy. And so one of the things that we've done recently, as you may know, is we've actually released a Canvas mini course that's designed for school counselors and helps them look at, you know, how do you schedule K-12 world language courses so that students can progress in a way that we would hope and maybe earn the Seal of Biliteracy. We were the first state to ever respond to the call for that with the Seal of Biliteracy in educating our school counselors. But then those materials can also be used to educate others. World language teachers themselves or administrators could take that course that's available through our NESIS or home-based system and learn more about the Seal of Biliteracy and all K-12 world language programming to help with that. We also do a series of broadcasts each year to look at our current class of GLE earners and to think about what that means for us. And so if you want to know, for each graduating class, not only who your students were who earned that or how many, but you can actually look at it from the state perspective as well. We also, for the seal of biliteracy, want to increase the options for the English requirement of the GLE, so they mirror the options for the world language requirement. I told you there are three different ways students can show their world language proficiency and complete their world language requirement for the GLE. But for right now, there's only one in English. And so we want to expand those options and make sure that students have a course completion option for that requirement, which is what they currently have for English, and that's also exists in world languages, but also have an external testing option and a credit by demonstrated master CDM option for meeting English, because they can use all of those options for meeting the world language requirement. So that's something to think about as we think about what's next for the seal of biliteracy. I will tell you, the seal of biliteracy has been called the #1 advocacy tool for world language education for high school students, and not just by one person in North Carolina, but by many people in various states, because it really brings the accomplishments of bilingualism and biliteracy to the forefront and helps us think about things like this, learning more about how graduates use the seal of biliteracy in post-secondary study, whether they get college credit for having a seal of biliteracy, or if they are able to get placed in a higher level course and, let's say, earn a minor or some kind of certificate with their language, which we tend to see happening now anecdotally. We also want to learn more about how they use it in their jobs and their careers. Do they put it on their resume? Does it increase their hiring potential because they have a seal of biliteracy? So those are some things we're still learning about with the seal of biliteracy. So now I want you to share your ideas. This is another activity and another opportunity for us to gather some information, get your feedback about, in this case, the seal of biliteracy and how that impacts our standards. So I want you to share your ideas by going to our GLE page, and you see up there it's bit.ly/NC-SEAL-GLE. Take about 2 minutes to skim that page and think about how you have or how you could use the GLE as an advocacy tool for your students, your program, your school, your district, or whatever it would be. How could you use it as a tool, or how have you used it as a tool? And then you just share your ideas in the chat in 1 to 3 sentences. Remember, your experience or expertise may inspire other ideas. So I will go ahead and add the link to the seal of biliteracy page in the chat, and that way you can click right on that and go out to the page. I will watch our time so to make sure we get all of our information here, but I will add that and click on out to that now, and then go ahead and start adding your ideas into the chat. There you go. Let's go ahead and do that. All right, I'm already starting to see ideas rolled in. So Leslie says, for her, she would like to use the GLE to explain to students how they can be eligible for it and earning it at graduation, and the benefits of having the seal and including this accomplishment on their college resumes. She thinks this could help recruitment for upper level students, and she is exactly right. Since we got the GLE in North Carolina, we have started to see an increase in students taking level 3 and level 4 courses, as well as AP and IB courses. It's been subtle, but it's been growing over time. And we do think the GLE is a contributing factor to that, as well as other factors for students to continue their language study. This does help with their college resumes and admissions. I think all of us are aware that the UNC minimum admissions requirement is 2 years of language, but to be competitive on many of our campuses and specific programs, you have to do far more than the minimum, of course, whether we're talking about world languages or any other preparation that students do. And so this has become important, and the GLE has been used as an advocacy tool in this way. I also see that Tika has commented that she thinks that this information is particularly important for universities, just kind of like we were talking about. She notes that Winston-Salem State University gives course credit if students submit AP scores, and that's part of our uniform credit policy for AP and IB. The state just established that in the fall of 2019. But she says, you know, students with prior knowledge are indeed placed in higher level classes, as we know, when they go on to post-secondary study. And she thinks if they're notified of that accomplishment, we may need to think of other ways to give incentives or recognition at the university level. And that's a good point. One of the things that just happened recently was a broadcast about, you know, what do universities do, or any post-secondary institution do, with students who earned a seal of biliteracy, and is there a way to continue to encourage them to do that, maybe an additional seal of biliteracy that they can work for as they go through their university studies or something like that. So lots of possibilities there. Tony noted that the GLE can be used to encourage students to continue their language study, and definitely makes them more competitive for college admissions. Amy said she's going to use this information about the GLE to grow the program at her school. Absolutely. Once students and parents as well know about the possibilities and this recognition, they're often very motivated to continue their language study and make sure they earn this. And keep in mind, you can earn the GLE in more than one world language. So you can qualify with any of the paths for multiple languages if you would like. Melissa noted that she really thinks we need more promotion of the GLE. In her district, there are many students who are not aware yet, even though she's been sharing things with teachers, with school counselors, and with administrators. And, you know, it's one of those things. We've always got to be educating others about what the possibilities are in world languages, as well as what can be accomplished and what's already available and accessible. So we continue on and work on those options. All right, well, let's go ahead and move forward. The last thing we're going to kind of look at on our timeline of standards milestones for advocacy are the last two, the posting of the standards mapping documents, both for global education and CEL, and the publication of our K-12 bridging documents for our different K-12 programs. Specifically, some of our benefits and celebrations is that our mapping documents, both for global education and for social and emotional learning, when they were published, clearly showed that there were components of global ed and CEL already in our state standards, embedded within them, and that there were connections that teachers were already making to these important initiatives. And so that was something we already had, which was very reassuring, especially as we've tackled those initiatives. And in this last year, the social emotional learning one has become quite critical, as we know. Also, the K-12 bridging documents grew out of a need as part of the pandemic to really look at, you know, K-12 articulation, sequencing, and proficiency outcomes, even when our classes and things were changed quite dramatically this past year and a half. And so those K-12 bridging documents have really supported world language teachers during the pandemic and helped us think more carefully about K-12 articulation, sequencing, and proficiency outcomes. And I think that's a tool that, even though it was born out of sort of a crisis situation, is something that we probably needed all along to really help understand this and to use as a guide to support world language education. And so we may continue to use that or update it as part of our standards implementation toolkit. If you're interested in these state standards materials like the mapping documents for global education and CEL, the K-12 bridging documents, or any of the other materials that are out there, we have those all posted on the standards page on the World Languages Google site. I'm going to put that link, of course, in the chat so you can go directly to it. And this would take you to it as well. So I've got this linked here on the web page. Because of our limited time, I'll just go ahead and scroll through that, but you can always access those materials as you need to. You'll notice too, the administrator guides are linked from that page as well under program resources. So what's next for our standards mapping and our K-12 bridging documents? Well, we want to continue to use the instructional toolkit components to implement our current standards. We're still not quite out of the pandemic yet, so of course we're still using the K-12 bridging documents, but likely we'll continue to use them even when our new school year starts. And we've always been using the mapping documents for global education and CEL. We also want to think about how we're going to prioritize the updating of our instructional toolkit components, like our standards mapping documents and our bridging documents, when we update our standards. So during that installation phase in the 2023-2024 school year, how do we need to update these different instructional toolkit components? Which one do we do first? Which one do we do second? That kind of thing. And what is it about them that needs to be updated? What have we learned that will help us move forward and create an instructional toolkit component with our new standards that will be most helpful in implementing those standards? So I just have a quick question for you here, put in the chat. What are your thoughts on the instructional toolkit components now and for the future? The ones we're talking about specifically here, the standards mapping documents, as well as our K-12 bridging documents, or any tools. So go ahead and add your thoughts to the chat box. All right, I'm starting to see some comments come in, particularly about the K-12 bridging documents, which are brand new. Carol knows that they are awesome. We all agree, and they were put together by a team of world language coordinators to go with what we already had. So they were put together quickly, but we think they've been very useful. She says they're a great guideline, and she's going to continue to use them, particularly some of the other tools as well, like the mapping documents for CEL. One person also said this is the first time they've heard of the K-12 bridging documents and they feel lost. Please don't. The bridging documents, like I said, are brand new. They came out in July of 2020, so they have not even been out a year yet. So if you're learning about them today, great. Now you can find out more information. You can go to that standards page. You can download the bridging document that you want, that's most applicable to you, and you can take your time to review it. We'll have time this summer, and those materials will always be there for you to use. Just download a copy, and then it's yours to start studying. Also have some people giving some feedback about thoughts for the instructional toolkit components. One person said we need to continue to stay abreast of the changing components and how they affect the standards so that we can better enable teachers to meet the needs of students. And you're absolutely right. That's one of the reasons why it's so important to look at the research and data and so forth with language acquisition and K-12 language study and outcomes. Jason said he loves the focus on updating the current as there are many good ideas coming through to help us make sure what we are doing now is working. And he's found some of the documents helpful, especially as he just came back to teaching last year. Well, welcome back. That's great. A couple people said too they want to continue to use instructional toolkit components now and for the future. Got some people saying they were also feeling embarrassed about not knowing about some of these tools, but again, some of these tools are brand new. Like the cell document, the mapping document got published like late 2019, and then of course everything happened with the pandemic. The K-12 bridging documents are brand new, so some of those things are brand new, and it takes time to get in and out about them. Another person said they think everyone needs more information about the K-12 bridging documents, and they're going to share those with their fellow teachers at their school and across their district so that they're aware of this resource. All right, and Jose said that he's going to continue to use them in his lessons. That's great. That's what they're designed for, is to help you implement our state standards in your classrooms. All right, well, I'm conscious of our time. Let's wrap up what we've got to do today with some reminders and announcements for all world language educators. I want to remind you that we are completing our World Language webinar series today. This is our second broadcast for the spring series. And of course, we are closing it out because it's the end of the school year. We're closing that out too. One thing to think about is that all of the archives, just like these archives, will be posted from today. And I'm putting in the chat box where they'll be posted at on the webinar series information page on the Google site. So all of the archives will be posted, our slides, our recording, our links, our handouts from all of the webinar series, the fall, winter, and spring. Likewise, if you're interested in the class of 2020 GLE webinar we had, and you want to get that information, that's also posted on the webinar series information page and the GLE page that we were on. So those materials are available for you to use. We also have a Lingua Folio webinar series, and we had Lingua Folio cafes this year. This is a way to look at using this formative assessment tool for language learning. And you may be familiar with the fact that we've used this quite extensively in North Carolina. And this year, in our webinar series and the cafes, we actually featured teachers from across North Carolina, K-12, different languages, talking about their use of Lingua Folio, how they work with students with it. And so you're welcome to go to that and explore what they were sharing as a way to help you as a teacher think about using this tool, which is free. And finally, one thing that I have to share with you that's kind of exciting and brand new is the greatest hits that we are putting out for the summer of 2021. As you know, you get credit for coming to these webinars if you participate in the live broadcast, but we were also asked to share some of those archives and make them available as the greatest hits for summer 2021 PD. So you have a chance to go back and listen to the recordings, do some activities, and earn credit for some of those that you might have missed. So for world languages, I put forward our World Language Reentry Resources, where we first explained the K-12 bridging documents and planning webinar, which was an hour-and-a-half long. I also put our fall webinar series as part of the greatest hits because it goes over each of our World Language Essential Standards and how to implement that and how to use different digital tools and things like that by standard in your classroom. As you can see, these are all usually an hour or an hour-and-a-half broadcasts. I also put in our greatest hits from this year, the Integrating Cell and World Languages that explain the mapping document in case you want to find out more about that. And we did the Lingua Folio for World Languages broadcast that was specifically focused on world languages as part of the greatest hits. So those will be available this summer for you to go back and do and earn some credits, some contact hours towards a CEU for licensure renewal, or just your own professional growth and information. So I put a link in our chat box to our SCNI greatest hits for summer of 2021. You see it pictured there on the right-hand side of the screen. It is in magazine format. So you see it here. I'm bringing it up on the screen for you. And you see that you can go through here. There's an explanation about how you use this. And then there's a table of contents. So all of our subject areas did this. So if you have colleagues in other areas, tell them about this. But for world languages, you see we have some materials there, links to that and all of that. We also have for dual language immersion or DLI. So that's available, and we're rolling that out today. So let's wrap up. I also always want to remind everyone to sign up for our listservs. You can sign up at the bit.ly link there for any of our NCDPI listservs or any of the other listservs for NCDPI. So if you're interested in getting things about global education or charter schools or K-12 legislative work, you can always do that as well. I'm putting that in there in the chat box too, so you can click on that link and go sign up for those listservs. All right, couple of things as we wrap up. Don't forget, the archives from this broadcast will be posted on the webinar series information page within the next week. I do try to get them turned around very quickly, especially given the time of year, so look for them soon, hopefully before Friday. The archives will include our recording, our slides in 3 formats, so if you want to download them as Google Slides or as PowerPoint slides, you can to use for your own local presentations. You don't have to recreate anything. They'll also be available as PDF. We'll include the handouts and links. And as I said, those of you who are looking for your certificate of participation to use for license renewal when participating in our live broadcast, look for that to come in an email as an attachment within about a week. Please do so. Also note that our local education agencies, LEAs, or districts and charter schools usually have to approve professional development offerings. Finally, if you need any other information from us, here's how you reach out to me. I am your World Languages Consultant at the Department of Public Instruction. You can contact me by email or phone. You can also look at the Google site or connect with me on Twitter. So those are all options for you. You just decide which one is best. I also put the other members of the team on here. My supervisor, Dr. Christy Day, is on there, and you can connect with her too. And Teresa Parker, our administrative specialist for English language arts, or ELA, and languages. Teresa, by the way, is the person who emails out our certificates of participation for webinars. So look for an email from her. I thank you for joining us today. I appreciate everyone being here and sharing your feedback and input. As I said, I will collect that as part of our standards revision process for world languages. I'll make that part of our data bank of resources and information that we can use to make our recommendations and move forward with our standards revision.